Hello and welcome to this Carlum Cymru Educators video. This is a video for AS level art and design, and my name is Lucy Saunders. This video is for guidance on Unit 1, your personal creative inquiry. So a quick overview to remind you of the A-level overall components. You have AS, which is Unit 1, and then A-level, which is Unit 2 and 3. So typically AS is completed in Year 12 and A2 or A-level is completed in Year 13, possibly starting Unit 2 at the end of Year 12. So this video is focusing on what would typically be completed during Year 12. This is a series of 4 videos, and as I've mentioned in the other videos, if you've seen them, these can be completed, watched in chronological order, or you can dip in and out of them. And they actually could be helpful for parts of your other units as well, because the overall structure of how we've designed these videos is to support you in the creative process. So for that reason, these could be used as guidance for any kind of creative work that you're doing, really. But I do refer to AS in this video. So this video is the final video in the series, and it is focusing on development to your final piece. So likelihood is, if you've got to this video, that you have created your project, you've thought of a theme, you've chosen artists and contextual references, and you've researched, photographed and drawn or painted or sculpted or created textiles or any of the mediums that you might be working in. And now you're getting to the sort of towards the certainly last third of your work, if not the finale of what you've been doing. So this is thinking about how to prepare for that final piece of work that offers a sort of conclusion to your work. If you are watching this video and you haven't done all those things, that's fine too. It might actually be helpful to watch all 4 videos before beginning your project. Depends on how you work. So use these however works best for you. For some people, thinking about each stage beforehand and perhaps even having a bit of an idea for a final piece before you've even really, done the body of work works quite well. For other people, there is a really there's a necessity to work through the earlier stages to have the idea of what the final piece might be. There is no right or wrong way. And WJC, the exam board, certainly don't specify how you need to structure this project. So throughout this video and all my other videos, it is really important that you remember this is just guidance and one version of how you might put a project together. This is not the only way or the best way. It is my personal approach as a teacher of several years, and I hope it's helpful. So we have looked at these questions before, but you're now coming to the end of your project, so it's important that you are not only focusing on what you're working on now, so your refinement and your final piece development, but also sort of looking back and modifying or improving on any of the other parts as your body of work develops. So you should be thinking about having demonstrated and continuing to demonstrate your skills, the theme that your project is about, your research. You should have taken some photographs or gone on a visit or both, done some observational work, studied some artists and shown how you've learnt from them. And you probably have done some experimentation already, but this section now is thinking about experimentation and refinement. So how will you embody all of those things that you've researched in a piece of artwork? To just remind you again, another little overview of things, you have been working through the different phases of your project, and the bit that we're sort of talking about now is phase 3 and 4. So phase 1 and 2 is your research, it's your beginnings, it's working out what you're doing, and then phase 3 is trying out informed artwork ideas. So I mentioned this in the GCSE video as well, if you have watched that one. The wording of this is really important. Your artwork needs to be informed. So I've had this question quite a few times, often from parents rather than students in parents' evenings and things like that, about if someone just does lots of really beautiful pieces of artwork, Why would they not get the full marks if their art is amazing? Well, actually, without that bit, that informed part, you can't fulfill the assessment objectives. So even if you did an absolutely beautiful drawing that was really realistic or really beautiful to look at or whatever you were aiming for and it really worked, if you have no prior research, no annotations, no recording, no body of work that goes with it, you can't access those marks. So it's really important to remember that when you are working through your project. The 4 assessment objectives are what we're aiming towards. And they're designed carefully to fit into a creative process. So they do fit naturally if you are evidencing what you are doing as you develop. Often, even if somebody did create a really beautiful piece of artwork, there are preparatory sketches and other bits and bobs that have gone on, and they've looked at other artists and things like that. So we just need to make sure you're evidencing those things. So then phase 3, as I said, try out informed artwork. So that could be composition, colorways, scale, message, and make a range of development pieces. That I will be talking about a lot in a moment. And then phase 4, refine and plan. So practice anything that didn't go so well in your developments, make adaptations, change things slightly, and evidence all of these things. All of those refinements, all of those decisions need to be evidenced. And then you will create a final outcome. So it might be a painting or a sculpture or a series of things or a mixed media response as a conclusion to your work. So remembering we're trying to address the 4 assessment objectives: critical understanding, creative making, reflective recording, and personal presentation. And those are not standalone tasks. They will interweave throughout. Each of those can be addressed. There might be a piece of work you do that addresses all 4, or perhaps 3 or 2. It's unlikely that there'll be a section of your work that fits one of the assessment objectives and another section that just fits the other. These things in creative work tend to move through different aspects of your project. So, what are developments? This is now the exciting bit. You are going to be an artist in your own right, if you haven't felt that you are already. You'll be working from your own photographs and in the style of your artist to explore your theme. In essence, you'll be creating your own artwork. So, what might you do? You might look at your artists and create a photo shoot in the style of your artist. You might edit this on Photoshop. You might take a photograph, like this is an ex-student of mine, and draw it, in the style of one of your artists. So the purpose of your artist work, so looking at this artist study, is to learn from it. So the reason this person has chosen to draw water on the skin is because they're then going to draw water on the skin from their own photograph. So remember, your artist research needs to be meaningful. Again, some more examples of how you might do some drawings based on your photographs and the links back to your artists. So these are exceptionally high quality, really, really beautiful drawings. These 2 are both drawings, and the kind of thing that you want to, certainly doesn't need to be portraiture, these are just examples, but that level of quality is where you should be aiming for at this stage. You might work digitally. So these are the same image from before, same couple of images that have been digitally rotated, repeated, layered up, adding different colours and things like that to make sure that it is demonstrating different ideas. So all of this research and development and potential ideas is all building towards your final piece. So your final piece should represent your best ideas. This is a time to show off your best skills and your best ideas. It should link to the way you have investigated your theme. You should use techniques that you have practiced and refined. That is a really important one. Well, they all are. But if you have been painting using oil paints throughout your project and you suddenly decide for your final piece you want to use pencil, that shows a lack of development and a lack of understanding of the process. If you did decide that, it's not that you can't, but you would probably need to go back into some of your earlier development pieces and your research and research someone that works with pencil, do some preparatory work in pencil in order to add that in so it isn't initially introduced in your final piece. You might hold something back for your final piece, as you might with an essay. You might hold something back for your conclusion, a final sentence or idea, but the entire conclusion wouldn't be brand new. It would be a summary of what you've said before, so keep that in mind. It needs to be practical in the time you have to make it. Depending on which unit you are looking at, you might be working under controlled conditions if you are doing the ESA. This means that you have to know that you can finish it in that time. So something that's really useful to do throughout your work is to time yourself. And I'm not suggesting you have to have a stopwatch on every time you do any artwork, but if you get to the point of your final piece and you have no recollection of how long one of your sculptures takes you to make, it's very difficult to plan in order to make sure your final piece is finished. So whilst doing your preparatory work that we'll talk about more in a moment, maybe just occasionally thinking, oh, I've been sat here for an hour. I'm just going to note that down. Look how far I've got after an hour. And then the next time you think, oh, okay, there's been another hour. Now it's been 4, now it's been 5, and I finished. Okay, that takes me 5 hours. If it was twice as big, maybe it'd take me about 10 hours. So thinking in a rough way so that you are aware that you are able to complete things in the time that you have allowed yourself. And the final point on there is that it links to the artists you have studied through materials or ideas, or both. So maybe you've looked at a pencil portrait artist. I'm sorry, I use portraiture as an example all the time. Please don't think that means that there's any benefit, any greater benefit to portraiture than anything else. It's just the first example that seems to come to mind. For example, if you were working in pencil, you would look at a pencil artist. If you are looking at ideas of identity, you might look at somebody who has looked at ideas of identity. So there should be a strong link between your artist and your materials or ideas or both. So what I'm going to do now is talk you through a couple of pieces of artwork, of A-level work, not from within Wales, so it's a different exam board, but really, really strong work that has been awarded very highly when marked and can be quite inspiring. For these, there is the link to where I have found these projects. They're not students of mine, they're not photographs of mine. So the link is on here on the PowerPoint that's created. So this is a student in Singapore, I want to say. It's definitely on the next couple of slides, so we'll have a look. So this is, I don't know if you can totally tell, but that is 2 walls that sort of meet in the corner, and they are covered in paper, and these are charcoal drawings. So certainly have a little click on that link and have a closer look to this artist's work if you want to. But this is a really ambitious final piece. So in AS, you might think, that's way too much for me. It's a massive leap from GCSE to be able to do something like that, which I would totally understand. So perhaps this is something you might do next year, or even I wouldn't be surprised to see something like this at degree level. But I think it's really important to see the most ambitious version of what you can do, rather than showing you something that's less ambitious, because then you might limit yourself. So I'm showing you the perhaps more extreme end of the spectrum in order to hopefully be inspiring rather than intimidating. So if this were someone's final piece, I want you to think for a moment, perhaps pause the video, about what they might have done or what they would need to have done to prepare. So just to point things out if it isn't clear on your screen, perhaps, there are figures within these charcoal drawings. So there are faces and arms and bodies, and the edges are sort of blurred. It's relatively central on the paper or wall, but there's a bit more negative space at the bottom than there is at the top. At the top, it certainly isn't like a parallel line, but it's a relatively even amount of negative space. Whereas at the bottom, it kind of weaves up and down a bit more. There's a little bit more negative space in some places. The edges of the image are uneven, as though they're sort of maybe blurred. The way I would read that is that perhaps we're looking in on a memory or looking back in time, or we're within the scene, perhaps. Something, it looks quite chaotic, like there's lots going on. This is all without having looked at what the meaning is. This is just me visually analysing what I can see. And that's something that you really need to become quite confident doing and quite practiced at as an art student. So in order to prepare for this work, I think we'll just skip forward and then come back. In order to prepare this work, the artist will have done lots of sketches. So this is a screen grab from the Student Art Guide website, whether it's linked before. So beautiful composition sketches depicting truncated bodies in flux. So as I said, there's lots of figures, they're all moving around. So Luca is the artist, to establish which mediums to use in her final work and how best to communicate ideas of creation, dissipation, and the spaces in between. So the three little drawings, well, the three sort of sections on the one side are much less finished than the bigger section. And these are what I would refer to as developments. This artist has got in mind roughly what her final piece might be. And as you can see, these preparatory sketches, it totally makes sense that these would be what would lead to that final piece. They're a similar medium, they're a similar sort of composition. The idea is there that's relatively similar. I think I have one more, yeah. So these are close-ups. In this one in particular, you can sort of see hands, but with blurred edges, and then a close-up of a face. So it says that the sort of portrait one rather than the landscape one, is a close-up detail of the mixed media charcoal drawing project. So an installation of charcoal, ink, and shredded alcohol wipes. So in order to get to this point, Luca would have needed to have become quite confident with charcoal and ink and shredded alcohol wipes. I imagine that means that she or he, I think it's a she, was practicing and working with this medium, wanted to smudge it, probably tried a few different things. I'm guessing this, I don't know this student, but it is unlikely that the first time they tried to work in this way, they knew exactly what it was going to look like. It's more likely in the preparatory sketches, they thought, oh, I would like that to be a bit more blurred. Perhaps tried tissue and it didn't quite work. Perhaps tried adding water and that didn't quite work either. And then thought, oh, I'll try an alcohol wipe to give that a little go. And it smudged in a way that was aesthetically pleasing and created the effect that she wanted. Again, on the other piece, it says preparatory sketch detail. You get an idea of the immense writhing beauty of Luca's work in this photograph. The fine mesh of the alcohol wipes is interwoven with smudges and coarser marks where the charcoal stick has grated across the paper surface. So I included these captions from the website because they're just a really excellent example of descriptive but also informative writing about artwork, which obviously you need to do throughout your own work. So it's just good to model some examples of how to do that here for you. There's another close-up of it. So you can see, I think that one is actually a close-up of the final piece, but there's certainly 3 or 4, or actually more than that, preparatory sketches. And with the little 3 on the side here, you can just about make out that there are notes as well. That is something that's really important. You should be annotating everything that you're doing as well. So to go back to Luca's own writing that I've taken from the website, she says, I began my exploration based on the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. At the very beginning, my exploration involved optical illusion art. The simultaneity of these images felt like a fitting vehicle to address the simultaneity of rebirth within death. Influenced by Shakespeare's King Lear, I briefly pursued the notion of material life as fleeting and illusory, rendered through symbolic drawings of carnival figures, clowns, and horses. The end of this illusion would give birth to the true nature of things. To reiterate the frailty of the human body, I experimented with paper clay to create contorted, broken figures resembling those of Pompeii. Although I eventually abandoned this concept, through lines from my exploration emerged in my final concept. These elements were the notion of representational elusiveness, as well as motives of creation and destruction. The aesthetic of the clay figure also emerged in the truncated and distorted figures in the final drawing. My working style was chaotic, unplanned, but intense. There's a very strong, intuitive undercurrent that guided me. So Luca L. from Singapore. So I think this project got full marks at A level. So not AS, this is an A level project, but the projects are structured similarly, and it is just good to look at an artist regardless of the qualification. So the first thing I noticed about this is it is very sophisticated language. This is written in a very clever, very academic way, as I think art should be approached. We'll look in a minute at more specific details of it, but just to just as an overview, obviously she references other things of the work we haven't seen. We've just seen the final piece and some preparatory work, but it talks about symbolic drawings, clowns, horses, carnival figures, and it talks about creating figures out of clay as well. So you can see that this person has worked through research and development ideas and come finally to these pieces. So there will have been development work before these charcoal sketches, and these are sort of the preparations for a final piece. So just to link back to earlier points that I've made in previous videos and to that sheet of the questions that we need to answer, I have highlighted here all of the contextual references in this artist statement, and I imagine there are more contextual references throughout Luca's work. This is just what has been mentioned in this one statement that was on the website. So we've got optical illusion art, Shakespeare, clowns and horses, and Pompeii. So all of these are contextual references. As I said, I imagine there are more throughout the work. It shows the depth of foundation that has been laid by the research of this project. Having these contextual and cultural references is always going to improve the meaning behind your work and the sort of the level of, you don't want it to be surface level. This gives it depth. That's the word I was looking for, depth. And then this time I've highlighted all the time that Luca refers to the theme or concept of her work. And she does mention that it changed. She said, I eventually abandoned this concept, but through lines emerged in my final work. So keeping in mind that what you started with might not be where you finish. As long as you're evidencing how those ideas came about, that's fine. In fact, that's great. So cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, the notion of material life as fleeting and illusory, and then the final concept being creation and destruction. But actually, they said, I eventually abandoned this concept. I don't think creation and destruction is miles away from the idea of looking at the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. There is a similarity. You can see the parallels of how one led to the other. So if this feels like a good project, it's interesting to you, and you'd like to look at more, go and have a look at that website. And I certainly think that it is a really inspiring project to look at, and a really excellent example of how to develop. I would imagine Luca will have also looked at figures, perhaps had people pose for them and photograph and draw, because to get the accuracy of the limbs and the movements and things, this has to be from real life. Also, to have got full marks, you need primary resources in your work. So I imagine they will have studied figures, maybe even studied sort of crowds and how people move in that way. They mentioned that they looked at Pompeii and tried to create 3D sculptures in clay of people in order to become a real expert of the human form, which you can totally see in this work. Although it is there's a blurred movement to it, you can see the accuracy of the bodies as well, which is really great. So another example is this one, which is a A-level student from New Zealand. I think the student's name is on maybe the next slide. Again, I've linked it. It's the same website, the Student Art Guide, but I've linked it if you want to look a bit closer. There's actually a lot more work of this artist there for you to see the whole project. So this is a really nice example of how to plan your developments. So here you have 10 examples of what this final piece might be. So I think it's her granddad that she's looking at in the project, but you have all these photographs and drawings and paintings of her granddad, and then she has used, I think it's a she, has used Photoshop to digitally layer other images within that. These are also her own images, and it's very clear where the artist comes from. I'll show you in a moment. But just evidencing the possible ways that this project could be concluded. If you look at the 6 images, 3 of those are actually very similar to each other. And they're certainly all very closely around the same theme, using similar, there's 1 or 2, maybe 3 different photographs of her granddad, but they're not wildly different. He's not doing anything hugely different in different photographs. He's just got his head at a slightly different angle, perhaps, and is smiling a bit more in one than the other. So your development and your ideas towards your final piece don't need to be wildly different to each other. You're just playing with different aspects. So that is the final piece. And you can see how these led to that. So your development pieces and your design ideas don't need to be wildly different to your final piece, there should be something new in your final piece. You don't just want to repeat things you've done before, but you don't want anything to be new, shockingly different, you know? It wouldn't show great understanding if this student, for example, had Amanda Zeng, there it is, if this student had looked at had been doing self-portraits all the way through, and then her final piece was of her granddad. Because it wouldn't make sense. It would be like, well, what was all your preparatory work for? Even though she could have started her project looking at self-portraits and, you know, however many weeks in, decided to shift it to somebody else in her family and started drawing her granddad in preparation for her final piece. There's nothing wrong with that. There just shouldn't be that disconnect or jump from the preparatory work to the final piece. So there's the final piece, there are the developments, and these are the two artists that she looked at. I think she looked at other artists too, but these are the two specific ones that you can really see the influence of in her final piece. That sectioning and layering and like plants coming out from behind the layers of the face. Having said that, her work does not look like a copy of the artist's work. So although you need to reference that you have looked at artists and show how they have inspired your work, we're not asking you to create copies of what they've done, because you need to be showing your own work. It needs to be personal to you and your own creativity. So this is a quote that Amanda Zeng, who is from New Zealand, wrote about her project. My grandfather's journey through spirituality and Buddhism has deepened throughout his whole life. He inspires me with his unrelenting faith every day, and he embodies all that I wanted to capture: love, hope, trust, gratitude, and awe. The centrality of spirituality within a person makes them uniquely whole and builds the framework for a life with integral meaning and devoted relationships. Spirituality is the supremacy of insight over logic, which allows one to experience revelations of the deepest truths. So I included that not because she speaks too specifically about her work, but it shows the meaning behind what she's doing. And certainly as you're moving through AS and as you're moving into A-level, it is really important that your work has meaning. GCSE projects don't reach as deeply as A-level projects do. And this certainly isn't a one-fits-all kind of approach, but it's something that will really help you access the marks that you deserve and also really inspire you as an artist and make your work even more interesting. So it is important to consider the formal elements of art. When you get to the stage where you are making these developments, what can you do with shape? Should you change anything? How about tone, texture, structure or composition, colour, line, pattern, form? Is that all of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. So when you get to the point of designing your final piece, pausing and considering the formal elements and writing about the formal elements in your work is a really important thing to do. This is a little tip of mine. Certainly, as I've said, isn't compulsory by the WJC, exam specification, but this is something that will really help you to refine your work. Please don't think that means you need to change each of these things. One or two will make more sense than others depending on your project. Shape, for example, might mean nothing to your tonal drawings of tools. But maybe it would actually, now that I've said that. But it depends completely on what you're looking at. So if I was going to give you an example of how you might alter a composition, this is some work that we've looked at previously by Barbara Walker, so in a previous video. These drawings are very similar, but the composition is different. And what I mean by that is on the piece that's on newspaper, there is a lot of negative space. So there is a lot of empty newspaper so that you can read the newspaper, because that has meaning to add to the project. The piece in the middle, there's some negative space on the bottom right in order to ensure, again, that you can read what the document beneath is. And I've put texture there as well, because not only have we played with texture here, Barbara Walker has played with texture here, but she's also played with, not only has Barbara Walker played with structure and composition here, she's also played with texture, because adding that white paint and the crinkled up fabric paper is going to make a different texture. And then the piece, the side profile here is very close in. There's hardly any negative space. The piece seems much more, it fills the frame much more. So this is one project and 3 developments within that use really different compositions and varying textures. So further examples of that. Again, different amounts of negative space. The piece here that's on the yellow background has got a pencil outline, so it's within a frame, which none of the other pieces do. The piece in the middle has a repetition of another figure in the background facing away, and then the other piece is again very close up, again playing with texture because of the different backgrounds. So that is one way you could design. So there's 3 different designs there and 3 different designs here of what Barbara Walker's final piece might be. She's a professional artist, not an A-level student, but I'm sure you see my point. So to conclude, to summarise, your first stage of development, you would need to make some design ideas. Now, that is fairly undisputed across most of our education. So although I'm saying everything is my own guidance, I think most art educators would recommend that a way to do design ideas is to sketch out some thumbnails. And what I mean by that is like little mini versions of what your final piece might be. You might do lots of these, or you might do larger ones with a bit more detail. You might use the computer to do this. You might use your own photographs and print them and label them, collage them. And from that, the second step there would be to create some of those pieces of artwork. So there's 2 elements to this. You're designing what you might do, but you're also making some of them. They won't be final pieces, but they will be resolved, finished pieces of artwork. The second stage is to stop there and go again with your design ideas. So making a whole nother section of thumbnails. So the first ones, you're at the top of that funnel. The design ideas might be quite broad. And then as you come down, you're going to be getting a bit more specific now. And then, like I said, you might select one of the formal elements and change one thing and make some of these developments. So throughout your project, there will be preparatory work and a final piece, but before that, you should have several pieces of artwork that are resolved as well. So that's what these developments are. Finally, your final piece design. So drawing out 2 or 3 potential final piece ideas and creating one of these pieces as a practice final piece, and then evaluating it, critically considering how well it's gone, and then creating your final piece. You would need to evaluate that as well in order to make it really clear that you have critically analysed it and show what's worked and what hasn't. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. As I said, you can dip in and out of these. This could be used towards the A-level project as well, the design of the structure of how your creative process fits together. These videos can suit whatever kind of project you're doing, and I hope they're helpful. Thank you for listening.